Now we are going to talk about Argentina, which has been battling a high inflation rate, but inflation rate at the end of February was around 12% against the predicted 15%. The country's president, Javier Milei, has been doing some work, tightening up measures to ensure that the inflation rate drops. But what is happening? Why is Argentina rather be battling a high inflation rate, which is considered as one of the worst inflation rates globally? We have Sam Orovwuje, who is Director, Center for Public Policy, with us in the studio this morning to talk about it. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure to be here.
All right, looking at Argentina, considered to have one of the worst inflation rates in the world, the president of the country inherited the crisis, but has been doing some work to ensure that inflation goes down. Thankfully, that of February is not as high as was predicted. But what's your take on the Argentina situation?
Thank you very much indeed. We must thank the Argentine president, Javier Milei, who came into power sometime in November last year. He came into a very worse economic situation. Argentina, as we speak, before December last year, was the highest ever, highest inflation in the world. He's a right-wing politician. So far, between December and February, there's been some level of development in terms of reduction in inflation. December was about 25 point something percent. January about 20%. Then February was about 13.5%. They projected 15%. So if you look at the austerity measure that he put in place in the last 4 months, is gradually yielding some rewards. Unfortunately, the rains devastated part of the gains they made sometime in February. But hopefully, the rain, on the other hand, will improve on their wheat cultivation. It's one of the largest wheat supplier in the world. So hopefully, those indicators will improve on livelihood and then on their exports. So in the months to come, there's hope that the austere measures will begin to have some positive results on the citizens.
Talking about these austerity measures, let's look at them. One of them is the cutting of cost of governance, removal of subsidies, and also some welfare programs. Now, what do you make of this decision? Do you consider it to be strategic, and do you still see him going this light in coming months, looking at this result that he has gotten in a few months?
If you look at the Argentine economy up till October last year, and you see what Javier Milei has done in the last 4 months, I think some of those decisions are strategic. They are going to impact on the citizens. The fiscal discipline, cutting the size of government. So if you take it to our client, people have been saying that if somebody can cut on the size of government to make some remarkable inroads in trying to provide a welfare for the citizen. So it's a welcome development. It looks disciplined. It looks focused in spite of the challenge ahead of him. And if you can use the benefit of foresight, so far in the last 4 months, it shows that it's pulling Argentina in the right direction. So I think every move, both fiscal discipline, subsidies, and cutting the size of government are strategic.
But in spite of these measures, the citizens of Argentina are lamenting because they say the prices for food and other basic necessities have increased. Targeting subsidies at a time like this, subsidies for things such as utilities and transport, do you think is a right step in the right direction?
If you just step back a little and look at the state they were up till October last year when this new government came into being, then there is their legitimate right to complain. But if somebody is trying to put you on the right trajectory in terms of growth and development, I think they should give the man a chance maybe for this year and see what he can do with the economy that is devastated, badly devastated in the last 3 decades, so to speak. So in my view, I think Javier Milei is doing remarkably well. particularly at the point where he came into governance.
Let's revisit the decision to streamline welfare programs, which was part of the austerity measures he took to ensure, to reduce the cost of governance. On the other hand, you have government saving money. But is it not going to impact people who these welfare programs are meant for when you streamline them? It's just like what you have and what we call social investment. Is it not going to also affect the people? And that's why you see the impact. People are complaining about the cost of living. What do you make of that?
No, the social intervention mechanisms are there. What it did was to streamline them and prioritize them. So it's not that everything was taken off the table for the average citizen. So you look at a system that is bedeviled with some high level of corruption, and somebody is trying to streamline it with a view to be able to tighten belt so that the country can be put on the right path of development. I think, in my view, the citizens should give him some little time to demonstrate the leadership competence that he has shown in the last 4 months. And if you look at the various international media review, his approach and policies has been salutary, particularly a country, like I mentioned earlier, that has been done the last 3 decades, about 30 years. Argentina has been in the woods, and somebody is trying to recalibrate the process so that the citizens can smile again. So in that breath, I think citizens should be patient to some extent.
So let's look at some of the actions that the president has taken towards curbing the inflation rate. Now, the currency was devalued sometime in December by about 50%, but it is reported that that action caused prices to leap even higher.
And I think that's just in the realm of speculation, in my view, because before they went into that route, they had a meeting with IMF and they designed some policy initiative which he bought into. So to that extent, if you say the high cost of living was occasioned by the devaluation of their local currency, to a very large extent, sounds a bit political. But what is important, that devaluation, if you look at the rate of inflation in December, January, up to February, even though the speculation is that they may not be able to maintain that trend till end of March. But if you look at the trajectory so far, there's a better light on the other end of the tunnel, in my view.
All right, I'm afraid we'll have to drag the Bretton Woods institutions into this again. IMF, for instance, with consultation or recommendation of the IMF for Argentina to devalue its currency. Now, this recommendation by the IMF to countries at some point in time to devalue their currency, what's your view on it? It happened in Egypt. At some time in Nigeria too, the IMF recommended that Nigeria devalues its currency. In a time where economists are beginning to take a second look at economic policies and how they've not been so effective in recent time, what's your view on the IMF's recommendation to countries to devalue their currency?
Strangely, if you are indebted or you want to borrow money, you are at the mercy of the lender. So that's, I just put it mildly. What that shows that most of the countries that have not been disciplined in terms of their monetary and fiscal policy, at the end of the tunnel, when they have a problem, they always go back to the IMF. So what do? Somebody wants to lend the package to you. We dictate the tune. So on the other hand, if you look at it from the point of view of international politics and conspiracy, then these Bretton Woods institutions had their own challenges. But if those countries that always go back to the IMF for development purposes have really led well in terms of how they manage their fiscal and monetary policy, they may not have a need to go back to those Bretton Woods institutions. So as long as they are there, they will dictate the tune at which they will lend to those countries. And that's why more often than not, they always ask countries to devalue their currency. So it's one of the conditionality that is tied to their lending.
All right, let's look at the poverty rate in Argentina. You know, reports suggest that it's increasing to like 60%. In fact, UNICEF has warned that child poverty may likely surge to 70% if there are measures that are not being put in place to mitigate against this. What will you expect from the government to correct this narrative, and why do you have this kind of surge?
Some of those statistics, I'm always worried with some of the statistics from these international donor agencies or multilateral organizations. 61%, yes. Does that represent the actual scenario on ground? In the last 30 years, I think UNICEF has always been there. A man has just come in, tried to do something to bring the people out of poverty. You're just having a reminder, particularly on child labor. That is not encouraging, in my view. What you should focus on, to what extent, with their own policy framework, help the Argentina government to be able to stay on track to reduce poverty. A poverty forecast that has been there for the past 30 years, and somebody is trying to change the narrative, then this conspiracy, as I call it most time, now come up when people are making some development effort to bring welfare to their people. I think it's not the place of UNICEF to always brandish figure. Whatever they are doing in Argentina, they should be able to focus more on providing real deliverables for children in particular.
But don't you think an organized body like UNICEF will not just release a figure without doing a thorough investigation and then speaking with the locals, you know, because data have been released for the nation to help when it comes to planning and research. And so the essence of these might not be to bring about any conspiracy theory, but to also point the attention of the government to the need to take action.
Yeah, Femi, you're right, but the point I'm making here is that who owns the data? That is the question.
Data might not be absolute.
No. The point I'm making is when you brandish data, does those data really represent, you sit in some corner and you disaggregate data that may not really be authentic in terms of being on the field. So maybe you have a data of 2-3 years ago, you try to extrapolate those data for the purpose of, okay, 5 years ago, this is the case it was. Now, if you look at those forecasts, this is what is likely to be. So the point I'm making, I'm not saying that data is bad, but who is the owner of that data? And what time are you putting those data in place? So if this data was released sometime in October last year, in terms of what you are doing, then that would have been okay, so that Javier Milei will have looked at those data to project the kind of economic policy he wants to put in place. So I'm not saying data are bad. Are they evidence-based? Who's collecting the data? If you look at those data vis-a-vis the national statistics in Argentina, you might see some marginal difference, and that's why I was making that point. I'm not criticizing data, but you must look at where those data are coming from and the timing of the release of those data.
All right, but what is to be done next to keep the people a bit happy? Because if it continues like this, what are the chances that this may not lead to some form of protest and some unrest in Argentina? Already the inflation rate for February is lower than what was expected. Do you foresee that of March being a bit lower? What else can Javier Milei do?
I think the point that has to be made here is that there's somebody at the helm of affair who's committed to the overall welfare of the citizen. So in that regard, he has made some critical pronouncements, and he has shown action in those pronouncements. So when he came into office in November, the first thing he did was actually to even pull Argentina, even from BRICS. There's a proposal, an ongoing discussion with the BRICS to join in. I said he needed to study the scenario. He cut the size of government. There's physical discipline. There are policy framework that has been put in place to engender discipline. And at the end of the day, by half of the year, some of the gains engendered by the discipline initiated by the president may yield result, and that may not lead to protests, in my view, because in terms of developmental trajectory, is already making efforts to pull down inflation, to see the cost of governance reduced, which will now impact the citizens, the savings they will make from those discipline that he has brought to fore.
Let's look at the report about heavy rains in Argentina. It's a good thing if you look at the impact on cultivation for agri purposes. It's a good thing. But the other hand, it's also leading to floods. What will you expect on the part of the government to correct this narrative and create a balance?
An emergency situation was put in place to see how the impact of the devastation occasioned by the heavy rains when it happened. On the other hand, meteorologists has predicted that these rains will improve on agricultural productivity, particularly cultivation of wheat. And if you look at the issues in Russia and Ukraine war, you find that if Argentina is able to have a greater harvest from wheat cultivation in particular, in addition to bananas, which is a major export earner for them, then again, that will improve on the economic stability of the country. So by and large, why the impact is impacted negatively in terms of flooding, a lot of cars were washed away, but the emergency regime was put in place. But then the weatherman has said that this will improve on the cultivation in the field and wheat, which is one of the major mainstay of Argentina's economy, will improve in terms of cultivation. So let's see how it goes in the months to come. But I'm sure with the level of discipline Javier Milei has put in place, there might be hope for the Argentine in the nearest future.
Like I said at the beginning of today's show, that there's a surprise. Many people were expecting that when the list for countries with worst food inflation rate comes out, Nigeria will be topmost. But it was missing from that list. What does that say? Sam Orovwuje, Director, Center for Public Policy, is still with us. Maybe we'll have the answer for us. So, what's your take on that? Food inflation rates for Nigeria, as at February, it was around 33.93%. But right now, it's still not considered as, Nigeria is not considered as countries with the worst food inflation.
Well, whether we are considered, whether we are among the 10 or not among the 10 that are top on the list, what is important is that the cost of living in Nigeria is still very high. And a food inflation that is over, is it 39?
33.
33.9% is still on the higher side. The average citizen cannot have a decent square meal a day. So in my view, it's still worrisome whether they put the name on the list. What is important is that the government must do the needful to reduce the cost of living, particularly food inflation. People can really hardly put a square meal on the table. So I don't think it's Uhuru yet.
All right, let's look at the statistics released by the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, which show that the annual food inflation rate was at 35.4% in January, higher than that of what you had in January 2023. So looking at that trend, how will you describe the trend in Nigeria when it comes to food inflation, and why did we get to this level? I'm aware of what is playing out globally, looking at the Red Sea attack, which has affected a lot of shipping and logistics, and then the war in Ukraine and all that. But we're talking about Nigeria now. How did we get to this level where there's surge in food inflation?
Essentially, it's as a result of the the state of insecurity in Nigeria. The Orovwuje spaces, particularly in northern Nigeria, is partly responsible for the high level of food inflation. So the government must take security seriously so that people can go back to farm, and that will help to reduce the high level of inflation. So the picture we're trying to paint of about 32.5% or thereabout now at some point in time, and now you're talking about
35.4 in January.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're talking about 33.9 something percent.
93 in February.
Yes, percent. Okay. That's very marginal. In mathematically speaking, that's very marginal. And if you really put the impact on the table, I don't think there's really much difference. But those who are collating and doing data analysis, yes, a 2% will be some improvement. But that is not a sharing news for me. So the government should just focus on how it can deal with the overlapping drivers of conflict, particularly terrorism, banditry, kidnapping that has overshadowed the entire northern Nigeria and some part of the country in a matter of speaking. So that will continue to impact negatively on those who have access to their farm. Where people are not secure to go to farm, it becomes a major problem.
Well, this World Bank's list was actually done based on an assessment conducted by analyzing the Consumer Price Index data from May to August 2023. Now, could that be the reason Nigeria is missing from the list? Because at that point in time, Nigeria's food inflation rate wasn't as high as it is currently.
No, I think the point here is that whoever did that report or research, they have their benchmark, and once those parameters set for the research, and you don't fall within the baseline of that research, then there's no problem because the parameter has been put in place. So maybe that is responsible. So the consumer price index, they're just mechanism you use to measure consumer goods in a given economy. So if we have moved a little away from that report, then to a very large extent we can give kudos to the government, but they must work hard, particularly in terms of cutting the size of governance so that we can make some savings and continue to fight terrorism so that people can go back to farm.
If you look at nations listed here, you have Argentina, you have Egypt, you have Zimbabwe. And if Nigeria is missing in the list, is this something to celebrate now? Or is it a call for serious work?
Well, like you said earlier, and like I mentioned too, that the basic parameter, maybe the baseline study, maybe we're just lucky that we are within the radar, but there's still a lot of work on the horizon. The government needs to show more physical discipline. The monetary regime on the other side must have a supervision on the banks so that even the rate of lending can go into the real sector.
All right, so for countries that are experiencing very high food inflation, I understand that there's a global food shortage, but for it to affect countries of Africa a lot, in the list you have Sierra Leone, you have Egypt, you have Rwanda, Ghana, amongst the other countries of the world. Africa is a continent where primary products mostly are sourced. Shouldn't food be one of those primary products that should be in abundance in Africa?
If you look at Africa generally, maybe apart from Senegal and Rwanda, and possibly Egypt, Zimbabwe has been on that threshold. God knows how and when that started in Zimbabwe. So the point is that a lot of African countries are bedeviled with conflicts, which are occasioned by resource control, particularly primary mineral resource. So to that extent, when you have internal conflicts, people are not able to do their legitimate farming, then it will impact negatively on the food supply, which is, we talk about more often than not, food security. So if you have many African countries within that list, it's not surprising because of some of the challenges we are going through. But it builds on African leadership to find a way to constantly pursue good governance so that we can achieve some semblance of security across Africa so that we can improve on the mechanism of growing food that will secure us.
Let me reel out these statistics and I'd like you to react to it because we're talking about Nigeria now. According to the Nigeria Bureau of Statistics, the food inflation in January was highest in Kogi State, that's about 44.1%. In Kwara, followed by Kwara, 40.8%, and Rivers, 14.0%. While the lowest annual rates of food inflation were recorded in Bauchi, which is 28.8%, followed by Adamawa, 29.8%, and Kano, 30.0%. How do you see these trends, looking at the ones with the highest, Kogi, Kwara, Rivers, the one with the lowest, you have Bauchi, Adamawa, and Kano? What do you make of this trend or this pattern of development in these states?
In my view, if you look at those figures and look at the percentage differences, and those in statistics, they talk about disaggregation of figure. The percentage are very marginal. So I don't think it's any good report to celebrate from the National Bureau of Statistics. But what is important is that those states when you have a lower level of food inflation, that means the opportunities in terms of access to farm and access to the market may be better than some of those states that are on the high side in terms of the figure. But my counsel would be that there's really nothing to celebrate because the differentials in terms of the figures are very marginal. So if you put them in actual reality, it doesn't really speak to anything, in my view. So let's see that the country improve on the security architecture, the security framework, so that we're able to grow more food. Then government should do some level of improvement in the rural area to stem the rural-urban migration, because almost everybody is in the city and there are fewer people on the farms. So if you have fewer people on the farm, then the little you have, everybody will be struggling for the little, so price will go up naturally if you use the forces of supply and demand as a basis. So the government need more work to be done in such a way that the ungoverned spaces is reduced to the barest minimum. Ungoverned space, I mean places like Zamfara, Borno, and some other places, and even up to the Middle Belt where you have a high level of kidnapping. The other day I hear that over 280 people were kidnapped. And sometimes when I hear that number, I'm worried. How do they move those people? On what basis? I don't really understand that, really. So the government needs to do more.
All right, so this list goes to show that there is food crisis across the globe. Now, it is prevalent in low and middle income countries, but even the high income countries are not spared. To what does the world owe this food crisis? Is it about the Russia and Ukraine war?
Yes, I think if you take it back a little, the COVID era impacted negatively across the global supply chain. So it has impact even on the food cultivation. But in most recent time, the crisis has been attributed to Ukraine-Russian war. Some crisis in the Middle East has been responsible. So the world must find a way to bring about global peace and security so that we can show up food supply and provide some food security for the world. But particularly hit is Africa. So the governments of Africa must find a way to collaboratively see how we can support one another in Africa, and the opportunity that the African Union has provided through the African Continental Free Trade Agreement or area should help Africa to reduce the impact of food security.
The global disruption in supply chain shouldn't be an opportunity for African countries to start looking inwards, looking at homegrown solutions rather than depending on what globally it's becoming a challenge. What are these homegrown solutions that could be deployed to mitigate the effect of this rise in food inflation?
I just spoke to one earlier. There's a need to look inward at the continental level. And there's a gateway, if you like, a strategic gateway that will enable Africa, and that's the African Continental Free Trade Agreement or Free Trade Area that has a population size of about 1.3 billion people. So because of these colonial demarcations of Lusophone, Francophone, Anglophone, is going to be an impediment to African development. So we need to remove those blind lessons of colonialism so that we can support ourselves as a country. We have what it takes, even in terms of agricultural commodities. If we have almost every primary mineral domiciled in Africa, I'm sure that if we really look inward, food will not really be a major problem.
But now that it is, what response can be done to ameliorate the situation? And if it's not done quickly, what are the likelihoods? What are the likely fallout from situations like this, particularly in Africa?
No, I think the Continental Union, that's AU, must take this responsibility, particularly food security, very serious. You can create institutions, but if you create those institutions and you don't allow those institutions to operate, then the basis of creating those institutions in the first place may not be necessary. So you have mechanisms, protocols, conventions that you have already put in place in Africa to address food security, and that we should improve on intra-African trade. Then what is stopping us for using those instruments to improve on our livelihood? So the African Union, in line with various regional institutions, should find a way to make this agreement work for the betterment of African citizens.
Let's look at a report released by the UN, talking about 26.5 million people living in Bauchi, Adamawa, may likely experience the worst of food inflation between June and August this year. Now, as much as we might say, okay, the statistics are scary and all that, they are not ultimate. What it means is it's good for planning and research. What would you expect if that kind of report is coming out, that residents living in Bauchi, Adamawa, thousands of people, millions of people living in those states might likely experience the worst of food crisis between June and August? What should federal government do in this kind of situation?
I think that statistic just speaks to the challenge of conflict, particularly terrorism, banditry, and kidnapping that has enveloped the whole of northern Nigeria. One can safely say that, where the ungoverned spaces has increased, even though on the other hand, government is telling us that they've been decimated largely, but people don't really have access to their farmland. So when you are not able to cultivate food items, then the negative impact is that there will be no food for people to eat. And worst hit is those people within the periphery of those conflict zones. So I think it's provokingly worrisome, and that the federal government has to quickly do something. If not, there will be a crisis on the horizon, and God forbid that we'll get to that point where people can no longer have access to food. Then they will be driven to some element of criminality, and that will be another gateway for people to be recruited into the Boko Haram, and some other banditry group or militia that operate in that region. So the figure should be taken seriously, and if you are saying between now and August, then you can just take that to the end of the year. But I hope that the government look at this report, particularly state government, will not always address the federal government. State government, even local government, have something to do. To what extent can we use local vigilantes, local informants, so that we can reduce the impact of insecurity on those towns or states that you just mentioned?
So the Lagos State government is having food markets where food items are sold at subsidized or low prices compared to other markets. Can this be replicated nationwide?
Well, we thank the Lagos State government for putting that initiative in place. But beyond those food markets, the other social interventions that they can use to reach the states. Not everybody. I understand that one of the ones that was open on, was yesterday?
Sunday, yes.
Yeah, the human traffic there is terrible. So we don't want a situation where there will be stampede and people will lose their lives because they are going to queue for relatively priced food markets. But then other states can study the initiative of the Lagos State government and see how far they can learn from the Lagos State government and replicate or scale them up elsewhere to see how that can impact on the various states. But beyond this, state governments must work extremely hard in trying to reduce the tide of insecurity, which has occasioned this high level of food crisis or high cost of living and a lower standard of living in Nigeria. So Lagos State, well done, but then you should find a way to increase the number of places where you can access this food. Understandably, this may be the pilot markets to understudy their impact, but then they should find a way to increase the number so that we don't have a stampede on our hand.
Nigeria is battling with food inflation, and on the other hand, there's advocacy for increasing salaries and wages, which the federal government is also considering that perhaps in April may likely have a review of official review of the minimum wage. What do you see playing out if this happens at a critical time like this?
Cost of living adjustment, simply called COLA, is a universal concept across the globe, where wages and salaries are adjusted in line with inflationary trends. So it's not a Nigerian issue. If you look at the minimum wage scenario, it's very sad that somebody at the end of the month takes away 30,000 naira. If you look at the cost of transportation, the cost of feeding an average family of 5, which in most cases is not like that in our climate. So it's difficult. So, but what Labour is proposing is very ambitious. I don't think it's sustainable. You're moving from maybe 30,000 to 1 million. I don't think it's sustainable.
Now it's back to 400,000.
Yeah, 400,000 is not even sustainable in the first place. If you look at disaggregation in terms of using exponential increase in terms of calculation, it doesn't make sense. But there's a need to review the minimum wage. But then Labour must take cognizance of other employers of labor who are struggling in their businesses. So if you are saying XY should pay 499,000, do you know to what extent those other companies are able to generate revenues, first and foremost, to even sustain the operation, not to talk about paying people 499. I think it's unusually ambitious. If I were sitting in that tripartite committee, I should be recommending about 100,000, which can be sustainable. So you don't put a wage regime, which inflation will wipe out in the shortest possible time. And they must consider other sector, particularly the informal sector, that is struggling to survive. But then cola is a means of national sustenance that is not unique to Nigeria.
All right, it's not about just increasing wage, because by the time wage is increased, what about the increase in food production? How can these two things go hand in hand so that the wage doesn't increase, but the food there is still in short supply, and so the clamor for wage increase comes up frequently?
No, I think that's the point I was just making, that when you're proposing an ambitious figure that is not sustainable in the first instance, taking public sector calculation alone, even the public sector is struggling. Then, on the other hand, if you push that too high, it's going to impact negatively on the cost of food supply, transportation. So if you make it minimally, then other people will be able to equally control the cost of production as well. So government too must find a way to reach out to the farming community by providing some basic input in terms of seeds and extension services that will improve on the yield of agricultural products or produce.
Now, let's look at some of the steps being taken by the federal government to address this issue of food crisis in Nigeria. One of the steps will be the directive from the president for some grains to be released, metric trunks of some grains to be released. What do you make of this approach? And then another one, you have the issue of cash transfer to the weaker in the society or the poor in the society. How do you assess the disposition of the federal government towards tackling this issue of food crisis? Look at some of those policies. Do you think they are sustainable and they will have lasting impact? For instance, the issue of cash transfer and also the release of tons of grains for Nigerians.
For me, so far, I think the release of grain sounds more political. As we speak, I've not really seen any state that has taken delivery of those grains. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think I've heard of any state that has really assessed that. Then on the other hand, cash transfer for the vulnerable in society is required. I don't think something is unusual when you do conditional cash transfer to vulnerable in society. Because the idea of this conditional cash transfer is to even enable vulnerable people to access some of that thing. So if, for example, you have access to get cash, then there's an opportunity to have access to the size of your household, and the government can use to promote other policy options. So if you say take cash, then some other information will be provided with that, and that information that is provided can even make you have access to some microcredit that can help to sustain their businesses, and that will enhance their livelihood and equally reflect the economy. So they should balance the release of grain and that of conditional cash transfer to the vulnerable in society. But I think the worry for most people is that who are the people that make up those registers? How are those money disbursed? Is it for political expediency, or only those who have access to politicians can access this money? So once they're able to answer those critical questions, I don't think there's anything wrong in giving conditional cash transfers to vulnerables in society.
So Africa's economic growth for 2023 dropped, but it is projected to grow in 2024, except for Central Africa. But with a situation where Africa is still struggling with high food inflation, do you see the increase in growth feasible for 2024?
Based on the projections, particularly from the African Development Bank, growth is feasible. But then, like I mentioned in one of the conversations earlier, is our leadership must take advantage of its own policy framework that they have put in place to enhance growth across Africa. And again, I can't mention that more. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement is a good policy initiative that was supposed to improve on intra-African trade. So if we're able to take cognizance of that, most African governments have an open visa regime to encourage trades among Africans, then that growth trajectory that is being forecasted will be able to reach that too. Central African Republic, because of the conflict that existed there, there is no really good projection. But then, we on the other side of sub-Saharan Africa in particular must see how we can work very hard to improve on trading among ourselves. This idea of African Union talking about a common currency that has had another setback recently must be looked into so that we can have a better future in terms of economic growth and development.
All right, Thomas, thank you very much, Sam Orovwuje, for being with us on the show today. We've been talking about the high food inflation rate across the globe, and it so happens that in that list released by the World Bank, Nigeria was missing from it. And Sam Orovwuje, who is Director, Center for Public Policy, has been with us discussing the issues. Again, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.